just dawned on me, this is the third Friday, possibly even fourth Friday in a row, that I'm leaving my office or leaving my studio to go out and shoot something. That's a pretty cool thing. And it's still actually pretty windy out here, but I'm gonna make it happen. We're gonna have a lot of fun. Actually, today's video is gonna be badass. I've hinted in a few of our recent videos that 2022 we have a lot of plans. We have for the channel here with regards to a lot of our editorial calendar, our video editorial calendars. And one of the big ones that I'm really excited about, super excited about, we get a lot of questions from you guys on, you know, just about anything that I can possibly imagine. And so what we've decided to do here is take a lot of these questions and kind of organize them into categories. And as this title probably gave it away, hey, that's a cool discovery. Old Land Rover right there. As the title suggests, Ask a Professional. Today, we're going to be talking about when you go off-roading, when you go overlanding, there's a particular component on your vehicle that takes a massive amount of that force and that beating that those trails can give. And it's not your tires. But then again, you already know what it's about because the title, I probably put suspension in the title. Anyways, so we're going to be talking about suspension today. You know, a lot of you don't inspect your inspection and give it the care that it really needs to. I mean, let's be real here. How many people want to crawl underneath their vehicles to inspect this on a regular basis? So going back to the whole premise behind this Ask a Professional video here, so we compile your questions in a kind of little buckets into verticals, shall we say. And then, as the title suggests, we're going to ask a professional, but we're going to take it one step further, two steps further. and so, we're meeting up with, I'm heading up to Santa Ana right now. We're going to be meeting up with Aiden James Customs, and these guys specialize in off-road vehicles, and they do it very well. They've been in the industry for like a bazillion years, and so we're going to go up there. As I understand, I think they're going to be doing an annual inspection on a 2014 Toyota 4Runner. During the course of this, he's going to be sharing, you know, what he's doing, kind of pointing out a few tips and pointers for us, the viewers, to be able to apply to our own vehicles. Through the course of this, of him doing this, I have a list of questions here on my remarkable tablet that I'm bringing here with me that I jotted down from you guys. So my goal here is to ask him some of the questions that you guys have asked, and I've kind of tailored these towards, as much as I can, to Toyota and suspension. So while they're going to be working on a Toyota, a lot of these questions, a lot of what we're going to be covering here today transcends far beyond Toyotas into pretty much any off-road vehicle. So that being the case, as I promised, this is going to be a really cool video. So anyways, guys, I think I'm supposed to be getting up there in a whopping 8 minutes. So I'm going to close off this video. Well, actually, before I close this off, one little favor to ask you. We do this to help you guys get the most out of your overlanding and off-road experience. If you find some value with this video, if you want to be super helpful and help the channel out, hit that like button down below. It really does help with the whole YouTube algorithm. Siri's telling me where they go. But anyways, as I said, if you can hit that like button, it really does help with the whole YouTube algorithm. That said, my friends, pull up a seat in. Let's go. Scott, Alex, good to meet you. How you doing today?
Good, how about you?
Awesome, brother. Hey, we really appreciate you having me up here. Guys, I made it up here at Aiden James Customs in Santa Ana, California. So as I mentioned to you a moment ago, we have a very exciting video here for you today. Now, Scott, I've shared with the audience on the way up here what we're going to be doing. So this is a 2014. You're going to be inspecting the suspension on this, correct? Awesome. Before we get going on this, can you do me a favor? Now, the one thing I didn't do here is, because I wanted to leave it for you, if you can share with our audience a little bit who you are, your background, and what does Aiden James do?
All right. Well, I am Scott Fisher, co-owner of Aiden James Customs with my wife, Shauna. I'm a prior Toyota Master Tech, ASE certified. We now specialize in everything off-road here with primarily Toyotas, but Jeeps, Subarus, Fords, Chevys, any of them. So if it goes off-road, we specialize in it.
Super cool. Now, today, as I understand, we're doing you're going to be doing a annual inspection. Now, would you say, talking about suspension, how often should somebody be inspecting their suspension? If they get off grid, if they go overlanding quite often, how often should they be inspecting the suspension?
I would inspect it regularly. Pretty much after every trip, you kind of want to look over it.
Okay, so regularly is defined after every trip. Okay, correct. Fantastic. Now, is this something what we're going to be covering today? Would you say this is what the owner-operators are able to do, or should they go to a shop and have this inspected?
Honestly, most certainly they can do it. They can get out their creeper or their blankets and lay on the ground and get under there, and it's really just checking bolts, making sure you got nothing that's come apart, nothing leaking, you didn't hit a line, you didn't bend something. Just checking underneath generally.
Okay, guys, as I mentioned a moment ago, so what we're going to be doing here is Scott's going to raise this thing up.
Wait, hold on. All right, now we can get underneath the vehicle because now you look the part.
That is some flat out Houdini stuff right there. All right, let's get on with it.
All righty. All right, so first what I want to do is, with some of our common tools, we'll grab and we'll start cranking on some of the bolts. On the 4Runners, for example, 19s, 17s, the millimeters, 10s, 12s, 14s, those are kind of your common sizes. So things you want to check is lower shock bolts. These tend to come loose. This vehicle has KDSS, so you've got the sway bar back here. You've got your bolts that hold on the sway bar. Basically what you're doing is you're looking at anything that would have been touched when an aftermarket suspension's been installed.
Now you brought up a good point, or a good leaping point into one of the questions. What is KDSS?
So KDSS is Kinetic Dynamic Suspension System. Started in 2004 on the Lexus GX 470, and basically what it is a disconnecting differential. So on the front and rear sway bars, you have this hydraulic cylinder that disconnects when you're off-road and allows for more articulation over a standard sway bar, but it also keeps you more stable.
So how does somebody know if their TRD Pro has, or 4Runner has KDSS?
TRD Pros don't have it, but if you look underneath your vehicle and you see this sway bar with this hydraulic cylinder on the driver's side, whether it be in the rear or the driver front, you have KDSS. If you don't have that, you're going to have a standard sway bar that connects with a link up toward the front here. Basically what I'm going to do is go around, kind of put my hands on things, hit skid plates such as the gas tank skid plate. He's got a loose bolt right here that I can see. So we want to find things such as that, and that's where earlier, before we put this on the lift, we took a test drive, and you'll see that video, but we're listening for things, and that's where the test drive gives us that opportunity to kind of listen for rattles, noises, clunking, squeaking, any kind of odd noises, because when you go off-road, you could just get rocks stuck in here. Things can come loose because you're vibrating it like crazy, but we're basically going to go through and kind of look over everything, make sure everything's tight.
Now, will you generally start in the back and just work your way forward when you're working on these?
I typically do. I typically start at the back and then go forward and just basically put a wrench on everything and make sure it's tight.
Now, I see you tooling around the shocks over there. How do you know when your shocks need to be serviced?
Typically your shocks would need to be serviced. It's roughly about 50,000 miles, but it depends the weather and the climates that they're going to see. For example, this is a California vehicle. We don't salt our roads, so your seals are going to last a little bit longer. But typically if you start seeing leaking up here at the shocks from the seals, you start seeing it get discolored right in here and fluid on the shock shaft. That's about when you want to have those shocks rebuilt.
Okay. Now, from your experience, going back to the rattling sound, what are some things that generally, from your experience, you see coming loose?
It would typically be skid plates. This gentleman has aftermarket skid plates. You could have some of these shock mounts come loose. Up front, you end up getting, for example, these splash guards that make noise. That starts rattling, and you can hear that through the cabin. Any of the suspension bolts, cams, those are pretty common to come loose, based on just their rubber, and they vibrate like crazy, so they do come loose. So I'm always cranking down on the cams. That's pretty much what you're seeing.
Now, your underneath skid plate here, is aluminum or steel better when it comes to skid plates?
Depends what you're going to do. Typically aluminum is fine. I run aluminum. If you're going to be tagging some pretty heavy duty rocks, then I would go steel. But for most of these vehicles, you're not going to be rock crawling like that, so aluminum is just fine. It also helps you keep down on the weight.
Now, with a 4Runner, is it okay to go full height, like on a 3-inch for suspension-wise on these things?
Yeah, you can go up to 3 inches safely on these. Certainly if you have KDSS, and I can explain that a little bit more in depth later, but 3 inches is an optimal height on these as far as a max height. 2.5 is primarily the optimal, but 3 inches is just fine as long as you're using proper upper control arms that give you the added suspension geometry.
Now, Scott, when it comes to shocks and so forth, is there a preference between on these vehicles, Kings or Icon?
If I was to choose, it'd be King, and you're putting me on the spot there because we are an Icon dealer as well. But any of the coilover brands are really good. Fox, King, Icon, Radflow, for example. I personally run Radflow. The two vehicles we have right here have Kings on them. They're all great brands of shocks.
And while we're talking around the wheel area here, are 285s okay for a stock wheel on these things?
Oh yes, yes, not a problem at all. 285s will fit just fine on these stock wheels. We've put actually up to 35s on these stock wheels.
Wow.
See, for example, right here, had some bolts loose on its KDSS arms here.
Now, Scott, how do you raise the height of a suspension on something like this?
So typically you want to order them based on weight. This gentleman's running a full front bumper. You'd want to order your shocks with the correct front springs because that'll give you your height along with the matched preload to support the weight. If you are already running a softer spring and you're upgrading your front bumper or adding more weight, I recommend changing the springs, but you can add preload, and that's with the top shock collar. However, it does tighten up the ride because you're adding that preload, stiffening that spring. So it's best to think ahead and know what you're going to be running as far as weight, whether it be underbelly armor, bumpers, winch, dual battery, more. you can see these cams are pretty loose.
So with regards to that, at what point do they become a danger for the vehicle?
They don't typically become a danger unless left a long time, because these nuts are going to still be somewhat tight. You'll just start noticing slight wandering, your alignment will be off, you'll start getting extreme tire wear, you know, cupping or whatnot, depending on which way the alignment goes. But you can also start noticing a shift while driving. It almost feels like the vehicle wants to hunt on the road.
So more reason to, as you pointed out earlier, check these on a regular basis.
Correct.
Now, for a lot of the folks, now this is a California truck, as you pointed out earlier, that we don't have, unlike northern states where there's salt on the road and where they're prone to rust and so forth. If somebody is inspecting their vehicle and they see rust, how big of a problem is that?
Typically, you're going to get some surface rust in some of these spots. I wouldn't sweat it until you really start, and I don't have an example to show you on here because it's in good condition, but you really want to start worrying if you get an excessive amount of rust where you start seeing chunks of the metal falling off. In this case, we're going to see some minor surface rust, certainly on exposed spots where components are designed to rub against each other, like steering stops or you know, ends of different links and stuff. But that stuff is kind of normal.
Super cool.
Tighten up that gas tank skid. All right, so one other thing I like to check, in this case it's a little bit more difficult because of the skid plates, but seals. You have a seal here at the rear yoke of the transfer case. You've got seals in between the transmission and the transfer case, and then at the back of the motor where the transmission meets the motor.
So if you do see a leak, do you generally have to remove the skid plates to access, or at what point do you determine to remove skid plates and get a little closer?
Well, if, for example, if I were to see a leak at the back of the engine and the transmission here, I would assume it's a rear main seal at the crankshaft, which is the output shaft from the engine into the transmission. If I saw a leak there, then yes, we'd be removing the skid plates because we need to access this whole area to get all that out and have to remove the transmission to get to it.
Now, speaking of which, so from your experience, vehicles like this, so for owners to have kind of a gauge, at what miles marker do they generally, and I'm sure this is kind of a loosely, kind of an open term a little bit here, or a wandering number, but at what point do these vehicles usually become prone to where you're going to start noticing leaks on seals like this more often?
It's hard to put a number on that because I've had nearly brand new vehicles get leaks with seals, so it's a rough one to really estimate, but usually the high hundreds of thousands of miles is where you probably really are going to start seeing maybe a leak. And I say that very loosely, if you can tell, because it's tough. But that would be the area I would start thinking about looking a little bit more. You know, taking a little more time, getting your flashlight out, and looking at all those spots that have seals.
So, kind of goes to say that there's the importance of inspecting here, because there's really no hard line in this. If you've seen leaks on new vehicles, but it's a good or kind of testament to what you said earlier. Inspecting these on a regular basis because. Yep. Yeah, very good.
Yeah. And these have a very stout engine and drivetrain. That's why they haven't changed them since 2010. Actually, before that, it was slight changes from 2009 into 2010. However, this is pretty much the same platform since 2003.
Very good. Do these trucks have a weak point that would be a good area of focus to inspect a little bit more often?
Not really,
Okay.
to be honest with you. These are pretty stout trucks, and that's, again, why they haven't changed them.
Very good. Now, you were near the drivetrain a moment ago. What are some of the loop points, or what are the loop points for this?
Oh, so drive shaft loop points, and you have a couple. There's, let me grab my flashlight. This is for the yoke.
Okay.
Then you have one inside of here. Matter of fact, it's right there. That one's actually for this front U-joint.
Okay.
Then if you follow the drive shaft back, you have another Zerk fitting right here for the back U-joint. Now his is going to be a little more difficult for you to see up here, but the front drive shaft with the four-wheel drive, and his, we'd have to remove the skid plate. But inside the U-joints, much like the back, there's two Zerk fittings as well. One at the transfer case and one up front at the front differential. So in this case, I'm actually seeing oil residue up here around the front axle shaft, and it's spraying here, so that would lead me to believe that he's probably got a seal going bad here in this axle, which is fairly simple to replace.
So Scott, what would you suggest as being some basic tools that should be carried at all times in a vehicle like this?
So I carry my tool roll from step 22, and I have some basic tools in there, but combination wrenches, the box wrenches, screwdrivers, simple screwdrivers, nice little socket set, deeper, pretty much good for most of it. You can carry an impact if you want. I carry a small impact, some pliers, some wire cutters and stuff if you have to do some wire repairs. But I have my tool roll kit sitting out here that's got basically all the stuff that I carry. We've got combo wrenches, crescent wrenches, sockets, more sockets. This is all my pliers and screwdrivers in this one underneath. That's the main stuff. You'd want a little breaker bar for wheels and such.
Guys, there you go. So as you can see, there's not a lot that you need to do. Now, when you're heading out, again, the suspension is taking just a massive, or can have a tendency of taking a massive beating. So getting under there, putting aside 10 to 15 minutes, I like to remind, a long time ago, I went to school as a commercial airline pilot, and before I go flying a plane, you want to do a pre-flight. The same thing applies here. It's a mechanic. Things can go wrong. Things can rattle loose. As you notice, there was a couple bolts underneath there that were a little bit loose. Set aside a little time will go a long way. Having access in your home garage to tighten something up is going to be a lot easier than being out in the middle of nowhere, potentially with no cell service or nowhere near the tools that you have, and having something fail because you didn't do a pre-flight. So guys, that is all we have here for you today. This was a fun video to put together. Now it's that time of the video where I'm going to ask you to do all that YouTube stuff that is oh so valuable to the channel. If you found some value with this video, do me a favor, hit that like button down below. If you're currently not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button, and last but not least, kick that bell so that you're notified every time that we come out with a new video. Scott, it was an absolute pleasure to be up here today, and I really appreciate you taking us along the journey of doing this annual inspection, or not an annual inspection, but an inspection of the suspension of this vehicle right here, and certainly answering the questions. Guys, that is all we have here for you today, so we're going to be jumping out of the garage here, so you get out there and find your adventure.
Was that the actual torque spec?